Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge, a podcast about people in the FinTech space who are thinking through problems very clearly and are enjoying uncommon outcomes as a result of that. I'm Dr. Alice Elizabeth Wilson, founder and CEO of Uncommon, a specialist research and communication studio serving FinTech clients. In each episode, I sit down with someone who I think is brilliant to steal their ideas, insights, and mental models for my own benefit, and now also for yours. I am joined this morning by Dan Stelzer, who is a product marketing manager at Docker. And unlike many of the other conversations I've had on this show, the other peers and colleagues and friends who I've had conversations with have just been people who I'm connected to in the industry and I'm interested in what they have to say. But Dan, you and I have actually worked together before, so I'll be really interested, just from my own curiosity, to see how this conversation evolves, because we've had the experience of actually collaborating on a project together. But I would love to hand over to you first to introduce yourself in the way that feels the most interesting and relevant to you today.
Hi, Alice. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to work with you once again. Um, I'm Daniel Stelzer. I go by Dan, and I'm a part-time marketing manager at Docker. It's part of the product marketing team. And my role is essentially making sure that our partnerships team at Docker has all the tools and informations in regards to messaging and positioning and how we want to communicate the Docker products in a way that's going to best suit their needs. The partnerships teams, of course, they're doing business with partners, and that means that we need to modulate our message a certain way. And of course, we're going to focus our go-to-market strategy on certain motions. And my role is really, I like to think as my role as a translator, and I'm pretty sure this is gonna come up quite a lot. And I'm translating our product messaging into a message that can be easily understood by our partners and by our partnership team.
That is such a perfect segue into what I wanted us to talk about first, because much like yourself, Dan, I also think of myself and my own business as being sort of principally in the business of translating. That can mean different things for different clients and different projects, but perhaps you could speak to an example of an applied instance of when you have done this translating work from something that Docker offers into the language and storytelling that means the most to a particular vertical that you're talking to.
Of course, and I think the best example I have to give is actually the example that we worked on, which is a white paper that we just launched. This is the strategic investment for Docker in the financial services industry. And this is a perfect example of how we want to be doing that translation, or how I wanted to be doing that kind of translation. On one hand, we have Docker, which is a market leader, and we're building a great product for developer teams. These developer teams can use Docker, they see the use in Docker in several different verticals. On the other hand, you have executives in IT organizations within the financial services industries. And these people understand the value of Docker, they understand the technological value of Docker. But when you think about an IT executive in those organizations, who are they speaking to? They're speaking to not only the people within their organization, so the people that actually understand the technology, but they're also speaking to their peers in product, their peers in business, their peers in compliance. So they need to be able to speak business as well as they need to speak technology. And when they're speaking business, they don't want to hear about all the Docker features that we have for increasing developer productivity. They want to be able to understand what use cases and what kind of benefit to the
Yeah.
business they get by essentially making a case for Docker inside their
Yeah.
organizations.
This is something that I really kept very much at the forefront of my mind as we began our collaboration, because so often what I see happen is whoever is creating the content, for example, like a report or a white paper or something like that, that needs to be highly technical and very detailed, getting somehow like dragging their focus away into the like features and the how it works and everything like that, and being pulled away from the flesh and blood human being who will have to take this asset that we're spending so much time creating and take that asset to another flesh and blood human being and have a real life conversation face to face about, I think we should do this, make this investment because of these reasons. It's part of my overall strategy in any of the content that I make to stay as deeply rooted as I possibly can in the human beings who are interacting with the content, using it. How are they using it? How do they want to talk about it? How do their eyes interact with the page? How can we use design features like headings and subheadings to make this as easy for this soul who is as burdened and suffering as any of the rest of us, to make it as genuinely valuable to them as possible? And I think what you highlighted there is really at the core of it. Like, what are the benefits to my life of taking this action that the content is trying to persuade me to take, or like highlighting how my life could be different day to day, how my business could be different day to day, and how can we make it as easy as possible for the people we're talking to with this white paper to use the information we include there to take it to other non-specialist members of their teams who are experts in their own areas but need to see personally, how is this going to make a difference to my bottom line?
Yeah, and that's an inherently difficult thing to do because there's just so much that you can try to predict in someone's experience reading a white paper. I feel like people consume content in different ways, and people also use that content in different ways. It's a little bit like a tool. You can try to make like to create the use case to predict the use cases for a tool for a washing machine, for example. You can use a washing machine to like wash clothes, like to do your laundry, but you can also use it as a place where, by the way, this is what I'm doing here. It's actually storage for me, and you cannot really predict how this is going to happen. But what you can do is whenever you see people using content in a certain way, and if it's something that's beneficial for whoever's consuming the content, and there will possibly be or there will most likely be a benefit for the people who are writing it. And I think the biggest challenge in that kind of engagement is to really leverage that instead of saying, hey, you know what, we don't want this content to be used this specific way. We're actually not doing content like this anymore, or we're focusing on different kind of content. No, let's lean into the opportunity. Let's try to see the opportunity there.
That's such a great way to look at it, and is such like a I work in the tech industry orientation towards data. Like, how can we actually pay attention to the facts around us and use it to our advantage? It reminds me of the story of Lego. Do you know this story? Like the little building bricks Lego, right? So initially when that company started, they were making Legos only for kids, and it was all like things for children and stuff, and they were getting these letters in from like men in their 50s basically like, please, can you make a Lego train? I'd really like to build it. And they were like, no, we only make Legos for children. And this went on and on and on for years until and they started losing a load of money. The company was going to go under. Children didn't care about Legos until finally one of the executives was like, maybe we should pay attention to this huge pile of letters that we have in the mailroom from adults who are like, I would love to play with Lego, please. And they finally paid attention to that sort of blindsided, you can't predict how people are going to use this product that we've made. They started making Lego for adults, and now the company still to this day is like profitable and growing. And because they did what you just highlighted, acknowledge that they can't control and predict how people are going to use their products, including in our case content marketing assets. And yeah, being alive to the possibility of being able to learn something new from the way people are engaging with you and pivoting according to what they are showing you they want, rather than enforcing a top down sort of instruction of this is how you should engage with the content, this is what you need to get out of it.
Yeah, and that's also a hard thing because if you want to be analytical about content marketing, and I always want to be analytical and provide hard data. Sometimes what happens is that you look into the opportunities in the market and you look at the market signal and you try to write content to tackle that specific opportunity, but then people consume it in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, and you have to be willing to play along with it and essentially treat it as an experiment.
Yes, I think that's really key. I'd love to ask you, so in the context of the collaboration that we were involved in together and creating this white paper about specifically how Docker can be used advantageously in the FSI space, what could have gone wrong in this project and why didn't it go wrong?
Wow, that's such a good question because in my day-to-day, I have to work with a lot of people who are writing content for Docker and helping us really nail down our messaging and scale our team. And I've had bad engagements
Yeah.
before. I think the biggest difference between a good engagement and a bad engagement can be summarized into one word, which is clarity. If you have clarity on what you want, and if you have method, a methodology, or a process in which to kind of like make whatever ask clearer and essentially try to reduce ambiguity as much as you can, I think the collaboration is smooth. Because we're talking about a lot about AI and about how AI is unpredictable, but human beings are also unpredictable. I mean, I have a different background than yours. We were just talking about how our personal experiences shape our world and how each one of us relates differently to our reality. And this is even more complex for human beings because human beings, you're also dealing with feelings there, and you're also dealing with whatever baggage that they're bringing. And especially if you're writing for a company like Docker, we have very high standards on the content that we bring in because we have very high standards for our
Yeah.
customers, which means that the editing process can be very stressful for some people, having five, six people coming in, reading the document and making notes, making comments. It's really something that can be stressful for some people. So you need to have that kind of clarity, and you need to align that kind of clarity. You need to align on more than what you want, how you want things to be, and how you want collaboration to go in order to have a smooth engagement.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think clarity is the epicenter of good communication and good project outcomes. I know that some clients in the past have struggled with, for example, working with a partner and say they're creating a white paper together, and the feedback from the client can sometimes be something like, we just want this to go a bit deeper. That is not a request, it's not actionable, and you will only be disappointed on both sides from a feedback like, we want it to go a bit deeper. There is no measurable outcome there, there's no specificity. Deeper on what? Narratively? Deeper on statistics? What statistics? Would you like a regression analysis to be performed on this data body? Are you looking for more testimonials, more examples? The client thinks that they're being clear enough because they have a good idea in their head of what they mean by go deeper, or they don't have a good idea in their head of what they mean by go deeper. They're just hoping that you will understand approximately what is meant by go deeper and take the responsibility and the difficult work of doing that intellectually rigorous process of deciding, what do I mean? How do I want it? How will I know we've achieved it? What is good enough? What is not good enough? That takes a lot of time and effort. And it's no surprise that sometimes they'd prefer to be like, can you just sort this out, please? But like I said, that will only end up, in my experience, with both parties being disappointed. And clarity takes a lot of effort. It's a very high effort orientation to bring to every one of your communications and to all of your business processes. I
Yeah, and if I may just add on that, I think what makes a good, what made our engagement great was that I saw that you had a methodology, and you asked, remember in the beginning, you had 20, 25 questions that you were asking, to kind of get what precisely what we wanted out of this project. And I think this is something that started to be a benchmark for me. You know, whenever I start a new engagement with a content writer, I want to know if they have some kind of methodology to get to the final product, because the product itself will change and you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe the company priority has changed, but if you have the kind of clarity and if you can be precise on your ask, you know that the collaboration will feel good.
Yeah. I think that one of the particular differentiating factors or processes in our business is that it's underpinned by a level of scholarly rigor and academic training, which I suspect that most other like research and communications businesses are not. I earned my doctorate this year from the University of York, and I hold a PhD in sociology and a master's degree in research methods specifically. So I have 15 years of very hyper focused training around data collection, methodologies, being extremely clear about what are you trying to find out here in this piece of knowledge work, which is what we were doing together. The white paper was an example of a piece of knowledge work. What is the best way to find the results that we're looking for once we've defined them? So much rigor in thinking about how to think about. It's a level extra underneath, which provides more secure foundations for the whole project, I think. And the senior copywriter that I hire is also a senior academic, and our pool of experts that we rely on all have this scholarly training, which I think filters through into the level of like nuance and detail that we can bring to not just the outcome itself, not just the asset itself, but the thinking and strategy that underpins even before we begin the engagement.
Yeah, and to add to that, because I feel like especially recently there's mixed feelings about academia. People think academics are not moving fast enough, or that the innovations that are produced in academia are not coming to market quick enough. But here's the thing, rigor is something that you'll also see in the best companies. We also have rigorous processes at Docker, and we have especially a process of content editing and really content reviewing that's extremely rigorous. And we even joked, I told you before I submitted it for that process inside Docker, I even joked, hey, by the way, the way we do things may look a little bit dry, a little bit critical, and you just told me there's nothing like a peer review in academia.
To grow you a thick skin. Yeah, it's true. Once you've been through the
Exactly.
process of like internationally peer reviewed academic journal publishing, I don't think I have any feelings left to hurt. So I can't take any of the feedback personally.
Exactly. And I think this also is a big differentiator when you're working with content writers and people who are making content. You gotta have a thick skin.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, just personally, that is honestly quite easy because my commitment is to excellence in the outcome. It's not about me. It doesn't matter if I'm even involved in the thing that's being created, you know? Like my focus is on how can we make this thing as functional, as excellent as we possibly can. Part of the way that we can make it as excellent as we possibly can is for me to completely depersonalize my identity, my input from the asset that we're analyzing.
Yeah, I see that, but I would argue that you do have style, and this is something that I really appreciated about the piece of content that we worked on. I could see your style there, and I think it's a hard balance to strike.
Yeah.
Because when you're hiring someone, you want that kind of flexibility and you want that kind of love for the customer, or for, you know, kind of like wanting the customer to be satisfied no matter what. But style is something that is also important, especially when you're writing a content piece. It goes back to what you were saying in the beginning of our conversation, which is what's going to be the user experience there. And style has a lot to do
Mm,
with that, especially when you're consuming written content.
mm. Yeah, that's true. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what makes content creation in the tech and fintech space different from content creation in any other space. Perhaps you might like to share your thoughts on what the biggest challenges are of doing content well in the tech and fintech space, or what you've seen that as sort of like best practices, or I'm just interested in getting into what is specific and unique about content in the tech and fintech space versus other types of content marketing and creation.
Sure. So I can speak a little to that because I have worked in different industries before. It was always tech related, but I've worked in ad tech, so this is mostly focused on advertising. I worked in fintech, as you mentioned. I also do a lot of volunteering for NGOs here in Germany. And I would say that there's the specifics, but there's also the horizontal, and you would be surprised about how if you apply the principles horizontally, you are going to be successful regardless of the industry. I think people assign different weights or different importances. The content is gonna have more or less the same structure. You know, you have a message, you have an audience, you have a voice, and what's going to change is how much weight you want to put into each of that. You have the media. So, for example, when I was working in advertising, the content was highly visual. It was not a lot of text, and design was super important, not in the sense that you want to have something visual to explain the idea, but also you want to have the right color, you want to have the right icons. And for example, Docker, I would say Docker is an exception, at least in what I see in the technology, because we do care a lot about that. We do care a lot about our brand and our usability there. And also, we want to make content as easy as possible. But we also know that software engineers and developers, they like to read and they like to see the visual assets that they want to see are going to be different than, for example, the assets that a marketer wants to see. And this is obviously something that you have to modulate according to the industry. For fintech specifically, I think one very important point is that you need to show and you need to support any claim that you have with hard data and hard financial data, so that that data needs to be available for everyone. In general, I want to say that in tech, we're always going for a data-driven approach, but in financial markets, you want to be able to showcase the opportunity there, so the financial data as well. So how any investment translates to dollars, you cannot quantify experience in dollars as easily, but you have to have a way to do
Yeah.
it, and this is going to make a difference. And finally, I think one last thing I want to say is you have to start with the customer. You have to start with the audience. Even going more granular than the audience, you have to start with the experience. You need to understand what kind of experience you want to provide with that kind of content. And this is something that I'm always thinking about when either I'm writing content myself and creating content myself, or when I'm working with someone to create content.
I'd love to round off the conversation by asking you a final question, which is I would love to know what is the most difficult part of your day to day job, and what is the best part that you enjoy the most of your day to day job?
I think the most difficult part of my day-to-day job is the most difficult part of everybody's day-to-day job is dealing with people and dealing with different expectations. Um, it's also the most fun
Mm.
part because you get to learn about people, how you get to learn about how people communicate, how they like to consume information. Also, and that information doesn't need to be content specifically. It can be a Slack message. Some people like to huddle, some people prefer to drop into a Zoom call, some people want to meet face to face, some people prefer to communicate asynchronously. And I want to say I'm really fascinated with human beings. So I feel very privileged in my job to be able to deal with human beings in different ways.
I think this is something that you and I share, Dan, and is part of the reason why. So, my first experience of connecting with you and meeting with you was a very quick and very natural level of like a layer deeper of conversation than some clients are comfortable with. Plenty of our clients like to keep a nice, boundaried, professional, transactional kind of exchange, which is completely legitimate and perfectly fine. But for some wonderful and inexplicable reason, my experience was that when you and I first met, we immediately, almost immediately, started talking to each other in like a genuinely interested, curious, and quite friendly way, alongside all of the transactional and more like objective layers of conversation that we had to have about the project. It's part of the reason I was so excited to record this episode with you today. And I would agree with you that the greatest challenge and pleasure of running this business is exactly what you've summarized. It's the people, it's getting to build genuine human connections with people who I would otherwise have no way to meet and learn from and be shaped by in smaller and larger ways. And it's before I started this company, I harbored the kind of cynical view that when companies spoke about their vision, mission, and aims and those kinds of like pillars of identity within their own businesses, that it was largely a PR activity not underpinned by much substance. But now, as a CEO founder of my own company and doing some really deliberate and serious thinking about what kind of culture do I want to create in this business and what are our own vision, mission, and aims, very quickly what came to the surface for me was about keeping the business human, keeping our interactions human, keeping it centered in humanity before corporatality, before like the business objectives and so on, keeping centered in the human. And exactly like you said, being able to do that and create a culture where my like collaborators and my staff are encouraged to do the same thing is a really wonderful gift that running this business brings.
Yeah, and I think you do it very naturally uh, and very well, I have to add. Um, and yeah, as I was starting my career a few years ago, I also had some level of cynicality towards companies, but when you feel like you're part of a team, as I do at Docker, and when you really care about your users and about ultimately what's your mission, you start to see things differently. And yeah, I mean, of course, we live in a specific system. I don't think people are blind to that. I think what we need to focus and what we need to highlight in that is that ultimately is it's humans to humans. We have this adage. I've heard that since I started my career. Companies do business with companies, but people do business with people.
Yeah, it's true. What's coming up for you in the immediate future that you're excited and energized about in a Docker context?
Oh, there's a lot coming up. I'm very excited about it. I cannot say everything because there's some announcements
How
coming,
exciting.
but yeah, what I can say is Docker is a leader in Gen AI. We are really focusing a lot of our efforts into shaping our Gen AI message, and I am very glad to be able to be but a small part of
Mm.
that. And yeah, if everybody's curious about what's going on there, I recommend everybody to visit Docker and our blog for upcoming announcements and interesting posts.
Fantastic. All eyes on Docker. I will add links to the blogs and like the best places to direct people to stay updated with what's upcoming. So people will be able to find that in the links in the description below the episode. Dan, I have really, really enjoyed this conversation, as I enjoy all of our conversations. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Alice.
See you next time. That's it for this episode of Uncommon Knowledge. I hope you learned something new or got an unfamiliar way to look at a familiar problem. Until next time, I wish you all good things, and I'll catch you on the next episode.